So what is a tyrant? What exactly is a tyrant? And I went through and I looked at some definition of words about tyrants. And the things you come up with is a person who engage in oppressive activities, oppressive, depressing activities. A person who engages in harsh activities. Arbitrary person, a person who's arbitrary, unjust. He's not a just person. He's a person who engages in domineering tactics. He's the bully in the schoolyard. He's heavy-handed. He's a person who weighs down freedom and takes over liberty. He's coercive. He tries to take from you by force. He's brutal. He's like someone who's severe in his activities. He's preemptory. He doesn't allow you to exercise your moral agency, your individuality, your freedom. He doesn't want you to exercise it because he's afraid of it. And he wants to control it. He's peremptory. He's suffocating. He's someone who's crushing. These are tyrants. These are tyrants. Thomas Jefferson said, and I want to quote directly from him. He uses a phrase, and I hope I can find it here, where he talks about, that he has sworn, I can't find it here exactly, but he says, I have sworn, here it is. I have my trusty little book. I'm going to read it here from Thomas Jefferson. He goes, I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. Every form of tyranny. And see, the logic of the tyrant is that they're doing all of these supposedly good things for society. I wrote down some of the things that the logic of the tyrant, claims to do. First of all, the logic of the tyrant is, I provided you with food and shelter. I provide you with food and shelter. That's the logic of the tyrant, because he gave you those things, okay? Or he allows you to have those things. I was once going through George Washington's estate. I was traveling in the vacation time, so I was at Mount Vernon, and I was going through George Washington's estate. And of course, there are still there preserved on his estate the slave quarters, because George Washington had slaves. Admittedly, he did pen in his will that after he died, they should be free. But he had them during his life. And as we were going through, as all of the tourists were going through one of these particular slave quarters, there was a little bed there, little slippers, all of the things there inside there. And I was looking at it, and there was this one man standing next to me, and he's like, that doesn't look so bad. They didn't have it so bad. And I thought to myself, what in the world are you talking about? Liberty cannot be purchased at the price of a bed. Liberty cannot be purchased at the price of giving someone food. You don't become less of a tyrant because you give somebody food. You don't become less of a tyrant because you give somebody housing. You don't become less of a tyrant because you provide them with clothing. You're still a tyrant because you take away the most important thing from them, liberty. You take away liberty. You take away their right to choose in their own moral agency. Yes, the right to fail, the right to make the wrong choice, the right to do those things. That's liberty. So, I was really amazed, you couldn't understand this very fundamental concept. I think it was George Mason in 1787 who said, every master of a slave is born a petty tyrant. A petty tyrant. So you can have an individual who's a tyrant against 1 or 2, 3 people. You can have a group of people, a citizen group, who are tyrants against an individual. And you can have a nation become tyrannical over a larger group of people. So the fact that the size doesn't determine whether or not you are engaging in tyrannical activity. It's the action itself. What else does the logic of the tyrant say? The logic of the tyrant says, be happy you're alive. Be happy you're alive. It's like, what? There are some things more important than life. I know that's shocking to people, but it is. There are some things more important than just preserving life. And that's one of those things is to be free. One of those things is to be free. Give me liberty or give me death, says Patrick Henry. Liberty is the most fundamental, most important reality of human existence. You take that away and you take away what God created. God created man and then he gave them liberty at the same time. There is no separation between creation and liberty. And if you separate them, you totally don't understand the concept of liberty. Another thing about the logic of the tyrant is, I'm preventing another wrong. Okay? And so this nonsense, this concept, is based on the notion that you have the right to preempt someone's moral agency. You do not have the right to preempt someone's moral agency. When you attempt to preempt someone's moral agency, you are engaging in tyranny. And there's no difference between that and, for example, George Bush engaging in a preemptive war, spending billions of dollars, putting the country in total debt, 4,000 Americans giving their lives for basically a lie. Preempting something that was not going to happen. So the logic is not right. You cannot say, I am preventing another from doing wrong, or I'm going to preempt it. So that logic doesn't necessarily work out. Then the other thing is, like, we are a private citizen group. We are not the government. So therefore you can't say we're tyrants. Well, excuse me, yes, we can. It's called vigilante activity. It's vigilante activity, right? You're going outside the law. You're not using the law lawfully. When you're not using the law lawfully, that's tyranny. That's tyranny. There is a quote by one of the founding fathers. I'm trying to remember what it was. And in it, he says, I think it was, if I could find it here. There's a point where one of the founding fathers talks about that the government of a few, here it is. This is the quote I want with regard to this, especially citizens groups who engages in tyrannical preemptive activities. If the government is in the hands of a few, they will tyrannize the many. And if it is in the hands of the many, they will tyrannize over the few. And if you extrapolate from that, the whole idea that you can preempt someone by citizen activity that's outside the government and that therefore that justifies it, actually it doesn't. Because that's no different than the brown shirts. The brown shirts in Nazi Germany were outside the government. Okay? They were just citizens groups. And they went around tyrannizing the Jewish people. Just being tyrants, breaking into their stores, destroying their property, stealing their stuff, dragging them out in the streets, beating them. This is tyranny. And you do not get away from the idea that you're a tyrant because you don't beat somebody up or because you don't kill them. But if you oppress them, if you are heavy-handed, if you are arbitrary, if you are unjust, that is tyranny. Another logic of the tyrant is we are acting out of love to redeem the person. Okay, first of all, who gave you that authority to take upon yourself the mission of redeeming somebody? Did you create anybody? You did not create anyone, so you should not be taking upon yourself that mission. You should not. You're not the government, and you're not God. You're not on God's mission, you're on your own mission. You're not on the government's mission, you're on your own mission. You're a vigilante group. This whole notion of we are acting out of love to redeem someone is tyranny. That does not justify your actions. Singing sweet love songs, telling them how, live right, do this right, blah, blah, blah. If you want to argue that point, if you want to have a debating society and tell somebody something like that, that's all fine and good. But the minute you translate that into concerted action against an individual, you become a tyrant. That's why we have an 1871 Civil Rights Act that says any group that organizes itself for the purpose of depriving someone of their civil rights, that is not something that we respect, that we should honor in our Constitution, and we don't. I want to mention the whole question of involuntary servitude. You know, we have in our Constitution an amendment to the Constitution, and it's called the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment says two things. The first part, it says, we forbid slavery. We forbid slavery outright. But it says something else. It says, nor shall there be involuntary servitude. What is involuntary servitude? Involuntary servitude is putting someone in a position where you are forcing them to do what you want without putting chains, literal chains on them. Where you force them through financial means, or you force them through coercion, or you force them through oppression, or you force them through smothering them, spying on them, any of those kinds of activities. That's a violation of the 13th Amendment. That is involuntary servitude. You're trying to force someone to live the life you want. De facto slavery. That's what that is. De facto slavery. But this is the logic of the tyrant. The logic of the tyrant is we are acting out of love. But in reality, it's involuntary servitude. To serve you, to serve your opinion of how a person should exercise their liberty. Anytime you take away from an individual person the right to free moral agency by your activities, you are a tyrant.